this works. Thanks for coming to our Comprehensive Planning Committee meeting. This is our final meeting. Hello, everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and effort in donating that and your input and conversation and discussion of this process. It's been great. Just a couple things to sort of housekeeping. This is our final meeting of the Comprehensive Planning Committee. The design team is going to be working on a comprehensive plan report over the next couple weeks that we'll be submitting to the board for approval, targeting the May 7th board meeting. And during that time, we're also amending their contract to start the design phase and approve the next phase of work as we get going. And then we'll be convening what we call our Design Advisory Group, the DAG or the DAG as we call it. So it's similar to the CPC committee, just in a different phase of the project. We'll have a similar application process, so we'll be sending out notification to the community to encourage people to apply. Similar process to this as far as meeting once a month or maybe every 5-6 weeks, kind of depending. Our process goes through the summer. We keep working even though school is off during the summer. But the design advisory group is really involved in the design development of the project for about a year to 18 months of regular meetings. And so it's a longer commitment than the Comprehensive Planning Committee, obviously. But we encourage you to apply and be involved if you're interested in that. During that design process, we will also be having a lot of other conversations and meetings with other stakeholder groups, staff, students. Regarding staff, we'll start meeting with specific subject matter groups and getting into more detail with the building design as we move forward. So I guess with that, I'll just hand it over to Elisa and get started.
Great, thank you, Eric. Grab the clicker here. All right, so as Eric mentioned, this is our last CPC. It's amazing that we have actually been meeting over the last 6 months. Hasn't felt that long. I feel like we've gotten so much information from all of you, so we really appreciate the participation and the input. We did just want to, again, make sure that we show the land acknowledgement. We're not going to read through it, but it is really important for all of us to remember those who were here before us and are still here with us now, but where the land really has come from. So our team, of course, I'm Elisa Laverflon as a reminder with Mela Architects, partnered with Studio Petretti. We also have our After Bruce team here with us today, T. Daniels, who will be sharing some really important insights that she and her team have been learning as they've been reaching out to those in the community who we often don't hear from. And what we are going to focus on today is a bit of an introduction of where we are, and then Eric is actually going to share some bond content to look more at the broader view of the bond itself. As we know, we've all been focused on Cleveland High School. T is then going to share what she has been hearing and learning in all of the engagement sessions that they have been working on out in the community. And then we will do a recap to share our recommended direction as well as the variables to make sure that everyone understands what we have reviewed over the last 6 months and how we have arrived at where we are now. We then will move into activities and feedback back at the listening stations, as we have done in the past CPC meetings. And then we will be looking for feedback and a little bit of celebration. Again, this is our last CPC, so we want to make sure that we are celebrating. We'd like to get some input from you, not only on the process, but also what you've learned. And so as we move into that design advisory group, as Eric mentioned, that we are making sure that we are carrying all of this forward. So, a preview of CPC 6 desired outcomes. As always, we want to make sure that we are grounded in a shared vision, and that shared vision is listed in the back. We will talk about it again today as we roll through the presentation. But with it also making sure that we are being supported by the community engagement information that we are learning from the After Bruce engagement team. Wanting to make sure we are understanding that analysis, the recommended approaches, and the variables that we've been sharing, and that's really important. I know there are a lot of variables, and we've been talking about a lot of different options, so just making sure that there is a good understanding of what we are arriving at for the recommended approach and why. And then ideas for design elements as we shape the future building. So I think it's important to remember that this is the comprehensive planning phase. We do have an entire design phase ahead of us. We're just going to be rolling into schematic design. So really those ideas for design elements are still in process. And then again, that feedback and celebration. So the requested feedback we will ask for, we're going to look at some options for the athletics field site today, and then would like to hear your feedback on that. And as I mentioned, feedback on the process itself and what you've learned over the last 6 months. So this is just a timeline to touch on where we are. Again, we are at CPC 6. We have been together for quite some time now, but this is really going to roll into that comprehensive plan that will be published and that will go to the board in order for us to move forward into that next future phase of design. We'll hit the bond and then hopefully construction. So with that, I'll hand it over to Eric to talk more about the bond itself.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not expecting you to read this, so I just want to make sure I can fit everything on one slide. But what this is a document that we shared with the school board facilities and operations committee a couple weeks ago. And in fact, just last night they had another meeting where this document was updated. And I'm happy to share this out in email to the whole committee so you can see this, but it's available on the board website. It's just not super easy to find, so I'm happy to send it out. But what this is looking at the overall capital improvement needs at the district. There's kind of a list of different items here, from critical systems, deferred maintenance, seismic, ADA, security, outdoor spaces, athletics, all gender restrooms. We have technology improvements. There's curriculum improvements. There's some capacity projects, and then the modernizations kind of are listed down here, and then there's bottom line kind of administrative and contingency. And so all these items have kind of a cost range, which is what we're seeing in the center column. Some of these say TBD because the facilities and maintenance group or whatever groups are responsible for some of these items are still working on what those estimated costs would be, or cost range. And kind of what it's, the cost range is kind of representing, especially up at the top regarding deferred maintenance, it's kind of what's, on the left side, it's kind of what's the kind of minimum that we need, and then on the right is sort of the maximum need. And then this far right column, it's called a sample option. So a sample option for an upcoming bond. And the target, at least at this first sample option, for one, the intent was really to get the conversation going and get the board to understand what the overall needs of the district are. But it's targeted at this 1.8 billion-ish figure, which they've determined keeping at that number would maintain the current tax rate. So there's just starting with a base option that doesn't raise taxes. And then, as you can see, maybe not see because it's pretty far away, but these are zeros, little zeros. So this means that in this option, there's nothing allocated to these different sort of areas with capital improvement needs. So right now the zeros are for seismic, ADA, security, etc. Because we know that there's kind of a limit that they want to start with, and then the conversations are, what trade-offs there could be for what's over here. How do they get some allocation to some of these items that are showing zero right now, and then working with the bond council, of course, to figure out all the math and everything. It's kind of complicated. But I just want to make sure that we kind of get an understanding within our group of what the bigger picture is. We've obviously been focusing on Cleveland, but when we're talking about sort of like our baseline costs and other options that have additional costs, when we're looking at our project, it may seem like maybe those few $1 million aren't that big a deal when we're looking at a $400 million project. At the same time, we know that there are zeros over here for some of these other needs within the district. And so, that kind of then ties back to our need to really make sure we can provide Cleveland a great modernized high school, but we're also doing it in an efficient way where we're not having to spend more than we need to. Any questions about this? I know you can't see it, but I'm just trying to explain it to you, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
Did they assume the low end of the range for Cleveland in the sample option?
Yes, so right now, the range for Cleveland and Ida B. Wells being the same, between 400 and 450 million. They plugged in 400. I saw the option last night that actually bumped those up to 425 because they've been seeing our information coming through that it's perhaps more than 400. But obviously, as I mentioned, there are these other conversations about how do they get something into those zeros. What I did see last night too, though, was that this went up to 2.2 billion, and that's related to some creative bond financing. So basically, to get more, what they have to do is they have to run the interest rate out longer for the bonds. And so basically the more we're trying to get and not raise taxes, that means that the bonds take longer to mature, and so that we actually can't go out for another bond for maybe 10 or 12 years, not like 4-year cycles as we've been doing. Unless the decision is to ask voters to approve a tax raise. So that's kind of where the creativity and the bond planning is happening, is how they finance it and the length of those bonds. And so, yeah, the more we're trying to get in this one, that means the bonds take longer before we can get new bonds that don't raise taxes. And so I think that there's definitely some conversations about what's happening, and there's an update last night, as I mentioned, so I'm happy to email this out because people might be interested in that. But any other questions? I think we can just move on. Yeah.
So I was at an event this morning where a guy named Andrew Home, who works he heads up the Portland Business Alliance, and so he was sharing research that group does specifically on Portland. And in the 30 years of history that they have data, this is the worst environment for Portland residents being willing to take on more taxes. So, and in fact, I just brought up the slides because they sent them out. The homeless services tax that was voted in about 2 years ago, I think, if that was put on the ballot today, it would likely fail, and I think it passed with over 60%. The preschool for all tax, if that was done today, it might pass at 51%. And then the clean energy, that's actually still getting fairly good support at 55%. So anyway, I just wanted to share with this group that this is real, and that we may really struggle to get liberal, young Portland residents to vote for any sort of tax increase. That was kind of the message that was coming through. So anyway, I'm starting to get on board with the fiscal responsibility.
Yeah.
That was my question, is did they do the survey in regards to the school bonds? Because they passed it like 70 plus last couple times around.
No, and I wanted to go ask him that follow-up question to know if they had any sort of research into that, but it's more of the Portland Business Alliance, so they're really looking, kind of at, anyway, so I didn't get the chance
And
to
I
ask the
think
question.
in some of those categories you mentioned, we're paying the tax and not seeing the progress. For the schools are very obvious.
That came up as
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
and you're
So-
right, the school tax, you see the money being
You
spent.
see it, you see the improvement. Hopefully.
I mean, the message though was that for one of the first times ever, well, statistics, whatever. Seriously, liberal younger people historically have voted for every tax measure possible on the ballot. They are now more than 50% saying, we will not vote for an increase in taxes. So that's the one that kind of surprised me.
You said this doesn't increase taxes, it maintains what we're already.
That is correct. I mean, that's currently what is being, the COO of the district is the one who's kind of putting these reports together and giving information to the board members. And that's where they're starting at as their basis of, this is an option that doesn't raise taxes.
Well, I'm impressed. If that's true, I would be very impressed.
I think it's the old bond falls off.
Not raise taxes.
Right. Yeah.
That's some magic there.
Yeah, and how that happens is that, say, the bonds that we passed in 2012, those are already sunset, or they're retiring, and
And these
so
are
we're
just
able to
school
maintain a current levy and just renew older bonds, is what that does. But yes, this is where we were a couple weeks ago. I did see that they did bump that up to 425, I think, on both the high schools. There's also this kind of TBD, but there was a report given to the committee last night about Jefferson High School. They've gone back and done a redesign of that project based on kind of some overwhelming community response to, well, for one, budget bust on the project. And in order to get the project in budget, they were gonna put the kids out at the Marshall campus. So they've done a whole redesign to change that, to keep kids on site, but it's extended the duration of the project. And so when we're looking at numbers like that, say just pushing it out a year, that means another year of what we're calling escalation, which is when our contractor says, okay, here's a price today to build this, but if we don't start construction for 3 years or 2 years, because you need to design it and get permits, then the number today is gonna be X amount higher in 2 years. And so it's every year, it's multiple millions of dollars is that escalation. So that's why the Jefferson project is actually coming back to get additional funding in this bond so that they can complete their project.
Eric, what is the
Yes.
Harriet Tubman? Because I thought they had to relocate, or they had a whole big problem.
Yes, Harriet Tubman Middle School needs to move. Basically, the state is coming in and taking the land there to expand I-5, and it's also related to the whole Albina sort of redevelopment. So that school, which is right next to I-5, has to move. So they got to find a new site, build out another school for that program. So that's why there's money
Couldn't seem like money.
and the state is not providing enough, and so they're supplementing what they're getting from the state.
So if this doesn't pass, our taxes go down?
Well, when you say it like that.
That's it, right? So,
Well, that's-
Well, it depends on when the current
I don't want
bonds
that, but I'm just saying.
retire. I'm not sure when that happens.
And that assumes all other taxes are constant, so that's just school bond, I'm sure, is what.
And I believe there are other bonds that have passed previously that haven't hit the levies yet.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So,
our taxes will.
just because I can't control my ego all the time, what was the, what was spent on Grant and Jefferson? I remember we saw those, I don't know, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, we saw them on that
Grant
chart.
and, you mean completed projects?
Yeah.
Lincoln.
I'm sorry,
The-
Franklin was the one I was thinking of, not
Grantly.
Franklin.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's pretty crazy, but thought we were paying a lot to rebuild high schools, 8-10 years ago. I'm not.
Lisa knows the grant numbers.
138 million
Okay.
for grant. Lincoln was, well, our budget was 242 million, but we've saved 17 million that we're putting back to the bond program. So that's, I'll do the
Those are
number,
construction
225.
costs, right?
No, all in.
Contractors, so,
Yeah.
For all new?
Yeah, so Lincoln High School, all new,
So if we
new
would've been
track and
smart,
field
we
and
would've
everything, that
financed
was
it
all
10 years ago and done all the high school at once.
227.
When you're done with budgets, the stakeholder groups that I talk to, everyone keeps asking me about schedule.
Schedule.
So,
Yes.
but I don't wanna interrupt this.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm fine to interrupt this now unless there's really cool stuff to
You don't
look
like being in the hot
at. There's a
seat?
big dose of reality here, but anyway.
Maybe just as anything different than what
Schedule
we
wise,
talked about in the beginning.
nothing is different than what we talked about in general. It's like 18 months to 2 years to do the design process. We've got about a 2.5 year process of construction. I mean, we're looking at, really the 2 year window when we get out of school in June, and then we're 2 years at Marshall and then coming back that following fall. So,
Is that the earliest 2027, summer 2027, at the very earliest?
28.
Yeah, okay, summer. That's what I was speaking to
Yeah.
the New Ulm PTA this weekend. That's why I said the summer 2028 was what we kind of talked about earlier.
Yes.
To be in the new building.
No.
They'll be back in the new
Back
one.
Yes, not construction. No,
September
groundbreaking.
of 20.
As soon as we can start
Yeah,
construction,
fall.
26,
Okay.
and then complete the building in 28.
Yeah. Done. Printing. It's on already.
Yep, it's all right.
I had to change the slide real quick, I didn't want you all to focus on that one earlier. But hi everyone, my name is T. Daniels. I'm the project manager from After Bruce. I've been working with all of the community engagement and the listening sessions. I haven't seen you all in a while. And now we're at CPC 6. We've wrapped up all of our engagement sessions. So we really started with a landscape scan, and we dove right into all the data that we could find about Cleveland High School, and we took all of that information and we created an engagement plan. So through that, we identified key stakeholders within the Cleveland community that we said would be helpful for us to connect with, and that would help us actually build out our listening sessions a little bit further. So I won't read through all of the stakeholders, but you'll see them listed up here. And after speaking to these folks and hearing more on their insight, learning about their lived experiences and their contacts and how they interact on a day-to-day basis within the school, we created these specific listening sessions. So the engagement sessions that we've designed are focused on serving marginalized communities, folks that don't often have the opportunity to share their feedback or have barriers to participation. So those groups that we've identified here are special folks in special education, so that's teachers, paraeducators, and staff, students who are in the special education program, and caregivers of special education students. We also work with community-based organizations and leaders that work within the Cleveland community. We chatted with students that were part of affinity groups, so that's your Latinx student union, your Black student union, a few other student unions. And then we connected with students, families of color, the broader community from intergenerational families. We connected with teachers and staff of color and students in the English language learner program. So based out of all of that, all of these sessions, every session we hosted, we had a really great turnout. We took notes, we listened to what folks had to say, and from there, we've been working through memos for each session, and then gathering themes of what we've been seeing. So on this next slide, I'll go over some of the key themes that we have identified.
This is not a comprehensive theme. Currently, right now, we're in process of compiling all the information we have, and developing a community engagement findings and recommendations report. We'll be sharing that with PPS and the design team. But I'll go over some general themes that I've heard from these groups right here. So the first theme is history matters in the way it visibilizes. So we've heard from students and families in underrepresented and marginalized communities struggle to feel connection to the building and its history. You know, while there's an understanding towards celebrating the long legacy of the alumni before them, the subtext is loudest. You know, who's missing from the photos that they see around the school, the trophies, and why? So overwhelmingly, the audiences that we have engaged have little or no connection to the building itself, and they're especially interested in how their communities can be a part of the placemaking movement moving forward. There are repeated calls to preserve the current murals in some ways and display them in the new campus alongside new dedicated spaces for future murals to be created. On a campus where many of these students feel like they don't belong, murals are one of the very few physical features of the building that reflect their presence, contributions, and the legacy of other students that look like them that came before them. We've heard a lot that the affinity groups worked really hard on these murals. Students are really proud of them and that they want to preserve them in the new school. So they suggested maybe framing them, taking a picture, somehow moving them to the new school design. Another theme that we heard is center the voices of those who have been underrepresented. This revolves around the idea that meaningful policy impacting marginalized communities should be made with intentionally, directly, and meaningfully including community in those processes. The modernization process is an opportunity to institutionalize community power by thoughtfully and intentionally co-creating opportunities to include students and families in design decisions, particularly for the spaces that will impact those groups the most. And that's really the importance around the work that After Bruce is doing, building these relationships and working with these communities to make sure that their voices are represented in this process. There is a desire for these students to have a space on campus where they can feel pride, safety, belonging, and it has been a sentiment that's been shared across multiple generations of students, particularly students of color at Cleveland High School. Besides the classroom of a few trusted teachers and advisors, very few students feel like there's a place in the school that actually makes them feel welcoming and that they can be their whole selves on campus. Another theme that we heard is creating spaces that invite pause can alleviate stigma. So students mentioned that they would feel less isolated and stigmatized if there were more comfortable, well-lit, and inviting spaces for them to sit. Currently, the designated spaces for sitting, gathering, or hanging out further exacerbate class stigmatism and overwhelm the students. This includes spaces like the cafeteria, the outdoor space, and hallways. Consider how design can normalize a culture of pause and reset. So students mentioned that there's not a lot of opportunity for them to just stop what they're doing, unwind and decompress, or take a moment if they need one. And then the last theme is design for the most impacted. So accessibility is often focused on compliance. While compliance guidelines are critical for establishing important universal standards, gaps often persist, especially for people who are most vulnerable to systemic inequities that drive them to the furthest margins. As feedback and insight rolled in, we found that design that fully considered a full range of differences and sought to address needs beyond compliance for students most impacted, revealed solutions for a multitude of challenges faced by other communities. So this is really focused on when you design for those most impacted and most in need, that everyone else benefits as well. So as I mentioned, we are still working on our final recommendations, and we hope to also be able to find some more insight working with these same groups and expanding our outreach in the next phase. And I'll be around if anyone has any questions about our community engagement process.
I wanted to say, just how much this process matters, and I've seen it in staff and students, and I think it should just be shared that you went to many different communities in this big central hub, because this space, at times it's hard to imagine, is home.
deserve great plaudits. I went to neurodiversity celebration presentations today. Every single person, this is with staff, they were presenting to staff. Every single speaker spoke about how pleased they were that they were involved in this. So that's huge. That's absolutely huge.
And many of them know they may not be around in this building.
Right.
But it's gonna improve for those who come after them, and that's important.
Cool. So that's wonderful feedback, thank you. And we will, as T said, we are gonna continue to bring these voices into our design process. In fact, we're working right now to design what that schematic design process looks like and how we can bring our design team and these communities closer together and really look at how we can test design options. Say, are we getting it? Are we getting it? Did we hear correctly? And is this going to make a real difference? So I am going to actually try to go very fast through my slides. I think you have seen more or less the content on every single one of these. A quick refresher of some of the content that will go into the final book, and then Amanda will actually tee up the further development we've done in the last few weeks that will also be going into that final report. So we want to make sure you as our committee are aware of everything that we've been doing and agree that we are faithfully following your directives, or your input, let's say. So we have our goals and our vision. They're in the back if you have comments. We've actually taken some of these and started to connect them to space and place. There's a board directly at the back opposite me. And we'd love to get more specific ideas from you about how the design of the building can create those spaces and places. At our last meeting, as you'll recall, we came in, we shared the 4 options, then we shared the direction we're going in general. We showed some variations where we moved off of kind of the U-shaped shape we've been showing for quite a few weeks and towards a more solar-oriented bar-shaped building with a central courtyard. So we're going to show more development of that in a few minutes. There are just this slide you've seen a few times, the 2 critical questions we've been asking again and again and again, just to make sure that we are letting folks know the direction the project is going and getting their feedback. So the first question is whether or not to keep the 1929 building. I think this group has been pretty solidly to the right-hand side of that, which is built all new, with the public coming in at the workshop number 2 as the most towards the middle, but still on the new building side. And then the balancing needs across 2 sites. It's interesting because I think last time we came in, we did a really good job of showing you how great 2 sites could be. And so this group, actually from the difference between CPC 4 and CPC 5, we had started to get more towards the middle. We also met with a group of students and they were even more onto the 1-2 sites. We actually, between our 2 offices, spent 8 periods here yesterday talking to students. We talked to, I don't even know how many students, 500 something. We have kids, they may. So they're all gonna be architects because we did such a good job presenting. And so we may even have more comments. We haven't quite pulled those in yet, but I guess that's to say that there is still, I think, interest in 2 sites, and we're gonna show you a couple versions today of what would have to be true if we were gonna go back to 2 sites. So I think we have a mainline plan that we will keep following, but there are a few variables that we'll look at in the next design process. There's also a survey out there. We actually had all the students who came into our group yesterday take it. This is data from a few days ago, but what we have seen so far is about 80%, 81% of folks are in favor of building all new, and then about 20% or so are saying, yeah, let's keep building. So that survey is open through Sunday. If you haven't taken it, or if you want to share it with your communities, but it's, I think, a combination of making sure folks know that we are moving forward and that this is a serious option, that we are looking at removing the entire existing building and making sure people are aware of that, which I think is really helpful. And we've had well over 1,000 people so far.
So the survey confused me a little in that you didn't bring up the 2-site option. You're just wanting to, what you just said was more clarifying.
Got it.
Yeah, that you just want to give people to know this is coming. If it is torn down, that it's out there in the world, those are the options, yeah.
Well, we want to make sure everyone's aware that's an option and that, you know, here's the some of the reasons why. And also we're gathering, I mean, tons of comments, you know, from people on both ends of the spectrum that is also really helpful, I think, to understand, you know, folks are interested in keeping the old building, what about it is really resonating with them and how that might impact future design work. Yeah.
Did you see, I mean, because when we looked, did you go back and happen to check the data?
I haven't come back through the list.
Because
I don't have.
if that was the same one from the design workshop.
Yeah, I don't have the comments.
Okay, there were no
today.
comments at all for any of the keep existing.
Mhm.
Lots of comments for almost every new, but like literally on that, I think 0 comments, so wasn't sure what happened, but that's statistically unlikely.
Sorry. Well, yeah, I think, because the survey also said, okay, if you prefer Plan B to keep the historic building, and then we gave 4 sort of reasons to pick, like what are your top 2 reasons out of these 4? And what we were thinking is that those reasons more or less will probably cover the bases, since we're getting very few written comments, that's in addition to that statement. But yes, again, on the on written comments regarding building all new, there were a lot of different various comments all across the board.
Yeah, I'm more commenting on that there were comments for that, and there, according to that data, there are 0 comments for keeping. So I was just curious, because that's just strange. That like not a single person out of, I mean, if we've had 1,000 people, 200 people, not a single person that wanted to keep it wrote a comment. I was just curious, it's just.
We haven't gone
That's
back.
what we're seeing.
Okay, that's fine.
I will say, folks who are interested in keeping the existing building, the biggest reason was that they felt it was important to preserve historic buildings, even though they posed challenges to reuse. So it was the kind of historic conversation. All right. So we shared on Saturday at the public workshop, we shared some logic. With Jesse's comments, I realized we weren't quite firm enough in why we ended up where we ended up, so I added another slide. So, you know, we shared these 4 options 2 meetings ago, and last meeting we've added some numbers to them. And last time we really focused on the 2 on the right-hand side, so all new, whether it was all on one site or coming out to 2 sites. It does get more expensive as we get onto 2 sites. So in terms of the existing building, so retaining about 30% of the 1929 building and modernizing that area and then adding new construction. The summary of why we're taking these off the table are site fit. There's simply not that much exterior space available because of the challenges of building around the existing building. That there are compromises to proportions and daylight in classrooms, and so I feel like there was a lot of challenges that we're seeing in the plan development. That even though there are folks who really like the existing facade of the building, many things about it will have to change in order to meet modern code. You know, right now, as folks who know the building well, there is no way to get in this building without going up or downstairs, either outside or inside. And that would cause physical changes to the outside. So folks who really like the exterior look of the building would not be seeing the same building, would be modified heavily. Both of these options had a significant cost increase over the baseline, which is beyond what Eric just started to share. And of course, higher risk with unknown conditions as we get into working with the existing building, especially on such a tight site. And then the summary of the 2 sites, again, I think it mostly relates to the sky bridge and the need to have a sky bridge, the cost of that sky bridge, and then the complexity of that bridge, routing anybody crossing 26th Avenue through one hallway, because you can't necessarily do it on all the levels of the building, so anybody going across would have to go to one hallway. And students, when we explain that, say, oh, that's exactly like the East Wing, right? You have to like go outside and around and up and down, and adds complexity to the school. And then a newer piece that we realized was that we would also have to underground all the power lines on both sides of the street, which adds a significant amount of cost. It doesn't necessarily improve value for most people. And the risk of getting the sky bridge approved. So if in the future we find a way to get past past these risks or these challenges, you know, we'll keep looking if there's a good enough reason to move on to the second site. But at this point, we are moving forward with the single option on one site, all new construction. As Amanda will show, we are definitely moving beyond this particular diagram, but it's really the one option that fits the bond cost profile. It's got the lowest risk. It has a lot of options within this to maximize solar, and really think about the student experience, which we'll show you in a minute. And we can get a lot of open space for students when we go to all new construction. So we're feeling pretty comfortable about the way that we can use this direction. And so in our report, we'll be really building on this and sharing more detail about where we want to go in design.
So, this will be a repeat for some people who were at the public meeting, and we touched on this, I think, even a little bit on the last CPC, but there's some people who weren't here last time. So, when we talk about looking at a consolidated building approach for the campus, not only is that folding in considerations of overall PPS sort of district facility needs and budgets, as well as all of the reasons that Abby just reviewed, but it's also, you know, chiefly because we think we can do an excellent job looking at a modernized Cleveland High School on this site, right? And so what we wanted to make sure is just everyone understood, as we discussed last time, that there are many variations to how that could look on this site, right? Same size building, all fit on one site, very different natures of open space, natures of solar orientation, and really ability to have different relationships with neighbors in different approaches as well. So we will continue in schematic design to study like the full sort of range of options and how we can look at different sort of variations. But even these early studies that we're doing right now in planning, we feel like really shows that we can have substantial and flexible open space, have a cost-effective solution, have a solution that really feels like a united campus where kids are held and supported sort of in this space. And we think we can do it in a way that both balances knitting into the neighborhood and sort of shielding and protecting that open space and the students from the more busy streets around on Powell and 26. So we did, last time we came to you and at the public meeting, get a lot of endorsement of the approach where we were looking at moving towards a more solar-oriented scheme, where we had some density along Southeast Franklin Street, a more linear style courtyard, and then the slightly lower volumes of the athletics and theater spaces across on Powell. So while we'll continue to iterate on that, that is the approach that we are looking at, you know, more clearly and will be representing in the report at the end of this phase, so that we can document what we've looked at, the feedback that we've heard, and have a sort of solid start to go into schematic design with. So that doesn't mean that it is going to be exactly the design in the future, but it does mean that it gives us a really comprehensive look at a modernized high school on the site that we know will work, will meet the district's needs, and has awesome potential for the experience for students, staff, and community members. So things that we are going to continue to study in particular are, in the next phase, is the entry location. We've talked about entering from the east rather than the west that currently Main Entry is located. But we know there's a lot of intricacies to that and different users that are coming in at different times of day, different volumes of people for different events. So we'll really be digging into that with the DAG during schematic design. We're also going to be looking really carefully at the experience on Powell. You know, thus far, I think a lot of the feedback we've received has been about sort of separating from Powell. That's an oversimplification, but we've heard a lot about, you know, not wanting open space related to Powell, really wanting to cut off the noise, all of those things. But we also know we want to balance that in the end in future phases of design with creating a better pedestrian experience on Powell, because there are folks that are walking there, including kids that are, you know, knitting into the neighborhood,
before and after school. So we want to make sure that we're being a good urban participant and creating good space on all sides of this campus. We're also gonna, in the same way, look at Franklin Street more carefully as we move forward in design and really refine the massing details and materials of the building. So we'll look at the height along Franklin Avenue. We know that we want to be really sensitive to neighbors, and as we discussed last time, we've already been looking at solar studies to make sure the height of the building will not shadow residential properties. But we will look at that in more detail and see the early designs or approaches that we looked at to set back the building mass along Franklin, more detail around that to really get into detailed improvement of experience. We heard that people really liked the courtyard experience for many reasons that we were initially even just starting to make with this linear scheme on the right. There was a lot of potential for school activities to spill into the courtyard, for students to spill in and out of the campus in a more calm way than currently to handle the large number of students by creating a large courtyard experience and really giving some breathing room to the street edge. So we'll continue to develop the courtyard, and we have a great landscape architect that will help us do that. We were also asked if we could incorporate elements from the existing exterior into the new interior or exterior of this building. So as Abby indicated, a lot of the feedback that we're receiving from the survey is if folks are interested in keeping the existing building, often it's because of the detail on the facade and either a fear that the new building would not have that level of detail, or just a specific kind of, I would say emotional, but a tie, a connection to that level of detail and scale. So we're really gonna take that to heart in terms of the design of the new building, but also trying to figure out, are there components like the inscriptions or cornice lines or those sorts of elements that we can integrate into the new campus. So this is what we're going to show for the comprehensive plan, full well knowing that it will have a lot more design refinement and study, but that's what we're going to represent in the report based on the feedback we received and balancing all of the sort of complex issues and nuances that we can see at this level of scale that we're working on. So this shows you a little bit more. We realize that we have been looking sort of from above a lot, and partially just to explain what is where, but also when we have physical models, it's nice to get down and take a look and sort of see a little bit more of human scale. So we're trying to show you some sections. So that's through the spaces. That's an architectural drawing style where we're effectively cutting through the site and buildings and looking at what the relationships are between interior and outdoor space and sort of scale. So this one here is cut directly through the center of the courtyard, looking that way, looking south. So what you can see here is some items that we've been discussing sort of one-on-one with folks around the model in more detail. We want to make sure everyone's starting to understand it by looking at it in different drawing forms. So here we see Southeast 28th Street here, where we have an on-grade sort of sidewalk level connection to the courtyard potentially, where you're coming through a gateway element that is also potentially bike parking along this edge. You're coming in and there's a way to directly get to the second floor and probably main entry. Main entry to the building. And we have an opportunity to manipulate the landscape because we do have a change in grade of 20 feet over this course of the site. So one early thought is that we could have some amphitheater or different terraces and levels in the courtyard. It can allow classes to spill out, it can allow performances to happen impromptu, lots of opportunities there. And that this courtyard can really connect all the way through the site to 26th Avenue here and negotiate that grade change with the courtyard. This will also allow us to connect to the interior of the building, both at the second floor and the first floor here. And we currently are representing the library and admin spaces in that sort of connecting element here that connects the different parts of the building. So you sort of get your sandwich too. So that is a space that we're looking at how it does a structure below it so we can rebuild it in a cost-effective fashion and control the land under it and have it be utilized as covered outdoor space, which is obviously everyone in our climate knows is a really high value space. So, but it is opportunity for some dynamism potentially and some ways to really connect interior and exterior and have a great variation in space. This section here is cut, I'll show you, as if we are cutting through the building right here and looking towards Southeast 28th. So in this case, you can see that this is Franklin right here, and the street on the opposite side of the drawing is Powell. And we are looking at the entrance off of Southeast 28th, which we saw here. Okay? Stop me if you want me to orient you more. So in this case, we can see that we are starting to understand and study as we're testing the program, this EdSpec for the Modernized High School, and how it fits within these volumes that we're creating. We're having this push and pull, which is what we want right now, between how the interior spaces are developing and allocated, and how the exterior experience feels of the building, right? And we're really early. There's gonna be a lot more development and push and pull between those two things. But we're excited, and I hope you're excited about the potential of how these things can work together to create really great experience on the interior and exterior of the building. So you can see that we haven't fully modeled the homes along Franklin. They're actually a bit taller roofs, but you can start to see some of the relationship there. That is one of the items I noted we're going to study more carefully in schematic design. But we are already, even at this early stage, looking at how we can balance, creating good solar gain and an experience in the courtyard while also being respectful of the neighbors. So how can we step back in different areas of the building to ensure that those angles of the sun are doing what they need to for the neighbors and creating a good experience, continuing to create it on Southeast Franklin Avenue, while also really supporting this excellent space on the interior. You can see that although this sort of academic bar here is definitely taller at 4 or 5 stories, depending on which part of the site you're on, than the athletics and the theater. It isn't that much taller. So because these are like high volume spaces, right? The gym and everything. So it'll be things that we're continuing to study exactly what is where, but overall this is just, it's a comprehensive high school. It's got some volume to it.
Can you just, sorry, can you remind me why the taller building is on Franklin? Is that purely a solar thing?
Sure. So the question was, why do we currently show the taller building on Franklin instead of, let's say, Powell or any other street? A longer discussion, I think, that we'll continue to have in schematic design in terms of exactly where it lands. But the feedback that we received pretty quickly when we were looking at the models last time for this group and in the public workshop was that it felt like it's definitely the right move for solar orientation by not putting the tall element along Powell at the south edge of the site. We are preserving as much sunlight into the courtyard as possible, which for 1,700 students potentially on campus is a huge benefit. And we need to balance that against the very real concerns and rights of the neighbors and a fewer number of people. So we're kind of balancing all of those things out. I think also a comment that a few people kind of brought up and endorsed that I think Brad had actually made really good comments around was that, not to single you out, it was a lot of people, but was that the nature of the types of spaces in the academic bars or most of the program is classrooms, offices, those sorts of spaces where smaller window openings are, or multiple window openings instead of a giant window is appropriate, you know, to allow good daylighting into those spaces, as well as a nice rhythm of them, so you can have flexibility of how you divide up the space in this sort of piece of building, if you will. And that there was an opportunity for us to sort of break down the scale, the appearance of the larger volume here with a large number of smaller openings that have a rhythm and materiality to them that is a little bit closer to the scale and the rhythm of residential houses on the street, and had a lot of opportunity to manipulate that. When we look at the athletics and the theater spaces, just by their very nature, very few windows, if any, on the theater side. And they're big boxes. So the nature of sort of setting that apart of the building mass or articulating it to break down the scale is a little less available to us as a tool for those types of spaces. So while we will, I guarantee, look at flipping this and what the implications are, you know, in schematic design along with many other studies, that's why we've landed here right now.
I think another thing, the way I like this oriented is that although the taller building is on Franklin, it almost allows more privacy for those neighbors because a lot of our like evening events are going to be in the spaces along Powell. So a lot of people in the evenings when people are at home will be on that side and not and looking into the houses on the school side.
Along with that, I'll add to that and say that it's really exciting to think about evening events happening here and being sort of a positive billboard, if you will, for the school, like, you know, a lantern of the few windows that it may be on the side and how we compose those edges will still be very careful, like important on how. But if they're animated at night by a glimpse of a game going on, you know, as like a lantern along Powell, or folks coming in and out of the theater, I think it's an exciting sort of civic gesture in a way to have those spaces along Powell. We also talked about how the courtyard in this approach has a very different relationship than it looks like in this one. So that'll be something we continue to study as well. Whereas 1,700 students spilling into these 4 residential houses across the street is kind of a lot. So, so different ways to sort of orchestrate how things are happening on site. Yes.
Would you typically do a 20-foot height ground floor for a school, or are you looking at that because of the grade change?
Great question. It's a little bit of both. I'd say that generally we would want the ground floor to be a bit taller than the other floors. Other floors are right around 14, 15 feet tall floor to floor. And part of that is for flexibility, but a lot of the spaces that programmatically or because of just relationships, how they work, want to be on the ground floor are also having spaces that need large volumes. So examples of that would be like the Black Box Theater would be a larger volume, and if we have it at 20 feet, it can fit like within a normal, all the rest of the ground floor height doesn't have to be its own structure. The Commons would be a space that it's very large and planned just because the size it needs to be to accommodate all the students and events. So it feels better as a space when it has a taller volume in it, or you know, height, ceiling height. So it's a little bit of both. It is convenient. We might land at 20 feet instead of 19 because if it solves some problems on the grade, that helps us too. So it's sort of it's a little bit nuanced, but does that answer your question? Okay.
Speaking of grade, so is the grade actually, is it 20 feet from?
Yeah, I can unpack that a little bit more. This is our low point. And this is our high point. So you know, here maybe it's 19 and a half or 18. But you know,
on the academic bar, let's say it's about a floor.
Yes, it's a floor.
Okay, so are you like, building's not gonna do this, right? So is it gonna be 5 stories where one is half to buried on the, okay.
Yes, it is. So the question was kind of what's the relationship between that grade change and the floors and how do they kind of line up? And that is exactly what we're trying to do with the building is that here, maybe 5 stories and articulated as such, and you walk in like on the sidewalk level in terms of the relationship between interior and exterior space. Whereas here, the perception of the building is a 4-story building. And ideally we can get a pretty close relationship between that second floor and the grade around. And we're, even in the early planning, which we'll jump into next, we're just fitting everything in, everything. We're starting to look at how can we take advantage of that in terms of what is positioned at the second floor at this corner. One thing we're looking at is, maybe it's the teen parent center preschool, so that drop off and all that kind of stuff is pretty easy. It's at the same street level, but it can be at the second floor. We almost have the benefit of 2 ground floors on this site. A lot of high schools, like Lincoln and everything, there's almost a fight because everything wants to be on the ground floor, right? But there's not enough ground floor, proportionally, usually on site. So we sort of have an interesting opportunity by bridging the courtyard through that grade change. We get an opportunity to, have more elements of the program have the relationship with the ground floor at the site that they would ideally like to have.
Okay, because I remember in the early CPC meetings, you talked about like not wanting to put anything, like not wanting to put students underground. But I guess maybe that's mostly like academic program instead of like common.
Yeah, that's a great clarification. We did talk about that early, that try to avoid having like at the ground floor, to have like privacy issues and stuff. And I would say we're still working through all that, but generally, items that we have at the ground floor are going to be non-regularly scheduled classes. The wood shop might be at the ground floor, which is an active use that's fun to see, and all that kind of stuff. But you can also bring shades down if you need to, and you can get deliveries and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot of issues that drive location.
I had more of a broader question about the leap to just a single site. It feels like it happened between meetings. A lot of the dots pointed towards a dual site. We got a scary budget thing which felt manipulative. And early on we were asked if, because we're late in the budget, will Cleveland need to compromise? The answer was no, because the ed spec will keep everything consistent. Well, here's a major compromise outside the ed spec that is not really supported by the community input, and particularly this group last meeting of the students. So I guess it feels, I understand the deep concern about the bond, and I never dreamed it'd be close to $2 billion. So there's a real worry, but the way it's been shifted feels, feels like we're just getting to a point that we were going to get to anyway. I left the second meeting in Malin, and I think I even wrote this. I said, I feel like you're going to tear the building down and go with the least cost option. And here we are today, surprisingly at that point. And maybe this isn't the feedback you're looking for, but I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed in the time we've spent and all the great information that's been gathered, and that dollars are so early in the project defining what we're getting. I know I'm an architect, I understand budgets, I understand value engineering, but there's going to be more value engineering. We're going to have more things that don't work out. So it's disappointing, very disappointing.
I'll just start, and others will probably want to.
Let me just say one other thing. I am very glad you guys are on the job, though. I really do believe that you will, if we do have to make a compromise and you don't get value engineered down to nothing, you will make rich space. What you've been showing before. I'm very glad. I don't want the Bora Lincoln. I thought that was very vanilla. You guys, I've seen your work, and I'm very glad you're on the job. So, yeah.
Well, I appreciate your comments in all directions. And I just want to validate that we hear you, for sure, and we want to hear it. Like, this is not a process that we're trying to engineer in any direction. We're genuinely trying to create a framework for us all to provide
for us to do our best job to try to provide you good information so you can provide input that feels authentic to you. It is also a complex and nuanced process, right?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
A complex and nuanced process, right, with a lot of inputs, right, which is not just this room, right? This room is extremely valuable, but as we talked about, there's a lot of inputs in the process. So what I'll maybe just step back and say is that I wouldn't say, like, we're not saying there's no way it's ever gonna happen, like a distributed scheme. I think it's okay for me to say that. What we're saying is that we don't yet have the narrative and the information that will help us substantiate the need to go to building on the parking lots. We share everyone's input that it's exciting and it would be really fun, you know what I mean? And it could be great space. And we also share the understanding that building on one site could be amazing space and good experience. So what we're trying to do right now is balance that all and say, we need to go in for the report with a inspired baseline that we feel like we can make a really good, genuinely Cleveland High School, and we don't think we're getting forced into that situation. And I think that the input we have received has changed 100%, right? That we moved further towards endorsement of the distributed build across 26 in the last couple of meetings, so I understand why that might feel like jarring to kind of come back to this point. But I would say that we moved closer to center. We didn't move closer to 100% endorsement of 2 sites, just to be, looking at the data. So lots more we can talk about that. I'm gonna let some other people.
I just want to make one comment on the narrative. The one thing that I think Cleveland is, students are not kept on campus. My son goes to McDonald's every day. If we can make a richer outdoor space by having more volume, the security for the campus. I heard that there was a class canceled because somebody had come in the building and had a mental incident, culinary class last week. There's a vulnerability here that no other campus has. And I think creating more outdoor space, more rich space is part of that security and can be part of the narrative for putting some volume across the street.
Also, not just is it like safer, but also lots of other schools have tons of outdoor space like right next to their school, like this is beforehand. So it's kind of like unfair that Cleveland doesn't have as much. Yeah.
You're totally right. I think we're all aligned that open space is so important to have a rich experience on campus. And Cleveland High School site is challenging. It is. We're not gonna pretend we're not for sure. We hope that you'll stick with us in providing input so that we can all make sure that we're pushing as hard as we can to get Cleveland High School as much as possible, and that it falls within the capability of the district to follow through on it.
I was gonna suggest you might wanna skip ahead of the plans. We do have 2 slides where we've sort of shown what we're calling the variables. So we see, we can come back through these, but we see 2 approaches that would, in some ways, get us to what you're talking about, Brian. So, and what we've been tasking ourselves, and it's gonna take a lot deeper dive into design and cost estimating, is there's sort of 2 good routes, I think, to get to the second site. And again, we have to test that against student experience and staff experience, because I will say the staff were maybe the least interested in some ways of having students on both sites. And really thinking about that narrow aperture of 1 level of sky bridge, and if you only have 12 feet of hallway to get 5 levels of kids across, does that work? That's something we have to test, and we will test early. So one thing we're looking at is, if we go to 2 sites, get more open space, as the students are advocating for, can we really minimize the costs and the risks of the sky bridge? And so that's one thing we're gonna study right out of the gate in schematic design. And then the next slide is a similar slide that we have some feelings that going from 5 stories to 4 stories may actually be more constructible and less costly to do. And so if we took a layer off the top of the building and put that onto the other site, could that let us get, you know,
More
twist that
open.
narrative, you know, shift the cost
Oh, I see, nice.
model?
Yeah.
That's gonna take some really deep dive with structural engineering and cost estimating and building code and just understanding what are the hidden costs maybe of 5 stories compared to slightly simpler approach of 4 stories. And again, you know, always balancing that with the student experience and the staff experience, and can we manage, you know, students across that sky bridge. So it's, we're definitely not closing the door on the option. We just know from a report standpoint, we're gonna start with what we know we can make work and then show what we hope we can make work. If that makes sense.
Okay, thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something, Brandon. I heard you mention EdSpec, and I just, like, the one site plan gets us to EdSpec, right?
Yes.
Everything you're putting forward gets us to EdSpec.
Correct, so just to clarify that,
What I was
whether
thinking
we
beyond is
distributed or
site.
consolidated, it's all the same square footage
Because it doesn't have building space.
and all the requirements.
But there's a couple of ed spec outdoor spaces for childcare and other, but it doesn't define outdoor space to be a priority beyond, like creating a ball field or creating anything.
So I'll just clarify that. and so
Within the
I'll
building,
clear.
within the building.
The EdSpec does primarily focus on interior space and interior square footage. It does also include some outdoor space, but you're right, it's less in the numbers of the EdSpec. But there are also some guiding principles that I think Eric talked about at one of our prior discussions, in the EdSpec, which is about prioritizing the heart of the school and prioritizing open space. While it doesn't give square footage, that those are very, important guiding principles that PPS has as part of the EdSpec process for Modernized High School. And that, in addition to community input and our design recommendation and all of those things, are really where we are really prioritizing be able to do that. And we appreciate that you all have been on a journey with us that will continue to go on, to test what the balance is between sort of density, height, and open space, and sort of other decisions like parking and, you know, all those sort of things. So, yeah.
I wonder if we should jump ahead to the track and talk more about the outdoor spaces, and then we could actually meet the floor plans over in the breakouts.
Yep.
All right, so we're going to talk a bit about the track, and what you'll notice here on this site, as we all know, is the track sits 4 blocks away from the main building. So different than any other building or high school at PPS, it causes some challenges. So we're looking at one of those challenges is connection. We have been talking about the connection between the main site and the athletic site and how we will be doing some improvement to the crossing. What we haven't talked specifically about is what's happening at the athletic site. So we're looking at a couple of components here, and one of those is really how we can take a look at either end of those sites, so at the new building, what that path is to the athletic site, and how we can make that connection, and maybe do some anchoring on either end of those sites. So, of the components of the athletic site, we do know that the track and field have been recently redone, so they're in really great shape. We'll be keeping those. We know the grandstand or the bleachers are also in good shape, so we'll be keeping those as well. We also know that the capacity.
Are you guys looking at improving the bleachers?
We are looking at adding capacity to the bleachers. We'll need to do some further study on that. But currently, what we're looking at is adding capacity to the bleachers.
Are you looking at people's experiences at the bleacher?
Absolutely.
Covered with elevation.
Yes.
There are no covered bleachers. Yeah. That's right.
Let's be the first. You're last, let's be the first.
say one little comment about the field, just
Yes.
because I work with a soccer coach, and there are elements of the field that are limiting to how they do sports and play. One of them being that there's a blacktop perimeter within like 6 feet of the out of bounds line, which is dangerous. And I think the Cleveland field is the narrowest field in DPS or in any team that they play against. So looking at some ways of modifying or improving the field, even though yes, it was just done.
Yeah, like you make a comment that actually, the blacktop is supposed to be taken care of this summer.
Yeah. It was not designed that way at all.
It might be easier to show the big one and then they can have the poster for the photo.
Well, I'll just jump here. So really what this slide is intended to do is not to go through all of the various options, but to talk about the components that we are looking at for the existing athletic site. So to the right, we have a skinny area from north to south where we are really looking at what that redevelopment looks like. We are looking at including a new field house, and the components or the program that goes within that field house are things like the locker rooms, team rooms, new restrooms, as well as equipment storage, and then also we're looking at a batting cage that can be used for multi-purpose when it's not being used as a batting cage. So those are the main components of a field house that we are looking at. We're looking at that option to potentially sit both at the north end of the site. There are some options on C and D where it sits at the south end of the site. And then again, also talking about the expansion of seating for the bleachers and thinking about what that extra space could be in terms of a second multi-use field perhaps, or some people gathering spaces like plazas and things like that. We also have been talking with the district, so we met with Marshall Haskins just yesterday, who is the Senior Director of Athletics, and he had another option that he threw out there, so something that we're looking at when we started talking about prioritizing space, what does that mean? He was really interested in taking a look to see if there was a possibility of actually getting 2 outdoor multi-purpose turf spaces or grass spaces. So one option that we are going to be studying is also if that field house were to move to the back side of where the existing bleachers are, would we be able to get a practice field both to the north and a smaller one to the south of the site? So that's enough.
What happened to the tennis courts?
Yeah, that's a rumble.
Yes, yes. So we were showing tennis courts when we met here last time. And what we have heard both from this group as well as the community and also talking with Marshall is that a multi-purpose field actually serves a greater number of students, and they currently don't have tennis on the site right now. So there was an interest in us looking at what could serve the most amount of students.
My understanding from speaking to the baseball coach is that he hasn't been consulted on the batting cages. I mean, we're actually, we have permits and plans to build something, but probably wouldn't if it's definitely gonna be included. How big, has there been consulting with the baseball staff on size and shape and requirements of things? Same with, I guess the same with soccer, football, and other sports as far as the turf fields.
We haven't met specifically with baseball at this point, and a lot of that is going to happen when we roll into schematic design. Like I mentioned, we had our first conversation with Marshall when we met yesterday, so those conversations are starting to happen, and we're definitely going to be diving into all of that when we roll forward.
And this baseball coach this year is new to not only Cleveland, but also to that program. The batting cage complex, the softball teams and baseball teams have looked at since I was 3, I feel. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yes, so that's really not, I'm defending you wholeheartedly. That truly, that monies were raised.
Yep, we're still raising it,
And,
but yeah.
exactly, and we received permits even.
Yep.
But it stalled for reasons that I am not privy to, nor do I need to be. But
Happy to
I
explain.
know that is another example of multi-use year-round. It could also serve as a place other than just softball and baseball. That is one of the reasons I'm a big proponent for multi-use sites, especially as we have lacrosse, we have rugby, we have, who am I missing? That is all club sports that before we know it are gonna be OSAA sports. And we have kids contributing to those, more power to them. Thank you. That's what I was trying to think of. The youth track program, which you can imagine brings literally hundreds of people to our facility.
So I was wondering if you guys are considering having a track open to the public.
That's what PBS is.
Well, like, yeah, I know you have to like change, like having the field house, like the way to close it off.
Right, that is an operational consideration. PPS would need to determine whether that would be possible. All right, well, I think Amanda is going to quickly jump us through. I'll rewind a little bit and then we'll jump back to the listening station.
Okay, I am not gonna spend as much time as we originally planned on the kind of like test fit plans that I cycled through here. But I do wanna just touch on it so you know, that we're doing the work and that if you wanna ask more questions after we get to the activity, feel free to kind of come up to me and we can talk through anything. So what we've been working on in the background, besides, you know, what seems maybe slightly more dynamic and experience oriented in 3 dimensions, is some traditional floor plans. So these are not a final building design. Many things will adjust as we move forward. We don't even have windows or doors, right? So these are really test fits, what we call. So we're taking the which is a spreadsheet, right, with square footages and uses and lots of rows and tabs, and making sure that, you know, just so you know, we've been doing this as we've been doing this work. We're also doing this work, where we're looking at making sure that that push and pull that I mentioned earlier of the interior space fit, the different types of spaces that might be on the ground floor versus the top floor, different spaces that want, let's say, windows and are going to be exposed edges of the building versus spaces like storage that might gravitate to this northeast ground floor corner of the site of Franklin and 28th, where the building would be buried. That's sort of like the lowest floor where it appears like a 4-story building, but it's 5. And we're looking at already, that means that perhaps the student center and common, just big open space, gravitates to the south side of the academic bar off of 26 within this protected, secured courtyard that gets really good south light, and you can spill out into the courtyard from that, and perhaps into the area that is covered that has that sort of bridge-like space above it, so that you can spill out to eat at tables, those sorts of things all year round. Looking at things like the service needs of the building, where we have the construction wood shop that might have easy deliveries because it's on ground level at a corner of the site where you can pull right up with, you know, a truck or supplies, as well as the kitchen, sort of back of house needs that can both get deliveries really easy. That's going to be a big daily need, as well as access to, custodial and trash and such there, and that we can sort of vary that loading zone within the grade change by letting it stay at ground level, first floor, and the grade rises alongside of it so we can protect it from views of the neighbors while still being able to do all those functional things. And looking at the relationship with the theater and some of the athletic spaces that are smaller on the ground floor with the gym on the next floor above. And how the theater back in house works and how the courtyard kind of connects to some of these spaces. Already thinking about things like entry and administration and how some of those things might come together with the nature of entering from the east to the site in relationship to the courtyard. It doesn't all work perfectly yet. But we're starting to just make sure that the spaces fit, that we're starting to explore adjacencies and relationships to each other, so that, one, we make sure that the square footage and size of the building and everything that we're submitting for the report jives roughly with the volumes we're showing. And that, frankly, we just have a place, a jumping off point in schematic design to test, push and pull at, get feedback on. Much of this will change. But it is our kind of first pass, first stab draft, and making sure that these relationships can be maintained and that we can create the spaces that we're looking for. So I'm gonna leave it there for right now. What you can see here is right now when we look at the plan, it seems a little boring, maybe a little right angles, a lot of things. So everything will be kind of like.
We got a sky bridge.
We do have a sky bridge. With the
Double-decker-
library.
double-decker sky bridge.
So, what we're trying to show you exhibits here is that as we move forward, we hope you stick around for and help give input on, that we will be able to massage many times the plans and the maps to create the experience that we're really looking to create. And that's sort of like the magic of architecture, is finding that place where we really are able to satisfy the functional needs and adjacencies and site relationships, while also, really what we really want to do is creating a great experience that makes people want to really be part of Cleveland High School, keeps kids and staff safe and in a great learning environment, and helps everyone embrace the school for the next 100 years. So we are going to launch into our activities, which a lot of the materials you've seen today are sort of refinements to discussions we've had. So what we have in the back of the room is boards that we took to the public meeting, which represent a bit more development than what you saw at the last CPC 5. And we'd like to just use the remainder of our time, 7:40 almost. So let's take maybe like 15 minutes to go to any board you want. The team will be situated around. I might hang out here for a little bit in case there's questions regarding slides. And ask for questions. We'd like to reconvene in 15 minutes and talk about next steps a little bit more. Thanks.
There was one thing I wanted to add that came from our conversation with athletics yesterday. This is kind of sort of late developing in our process, and this is something that will be in the report that will be included, because we're looking at what we'll do with Powell Park for improvements. We've been talking about that as potentially improving the field conditions there. The team has been studying a way to add a softball field to Powell Park, and there is enough space to do that. So we will have a diagram in the report that shows baseball and a new softball field, and then of course multi-purpose field that's also used by soccer and lacrosse and other sports during other season. But that's something that we do want to at least have on the table as an option, and we're going to start having conversations with Portland Parks about that possibility. So just want to make sure everyone's aware that that will be in the report. It's just kind of a sort of late development in our planning, but that's good news. So if we can actually get softball over there as well. So, all right, just want to make make sure you do that, and then go take a look at
A traffic point.
If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.